And welcome back to Chips and Salsa, where we talk about security at Intel. I'm CRob.
And I'm Jerry, and today we are addressing a question we've received from customers based on our public notice that Intel is not affected by this new CRob vulnerability that affects AMD products.
That's right. Customers were curious and they want to understand why Intel isn't affected.
And the answer lies in Intel's product security assurance journey, and for SMM starting well over a decade ago. And who better to answer this question than our special guests, Christopher Domas, or Chris Domas, and Burzin Daruwala, who have been focusing on this area together for many years.
Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Could you introduce yourselves to our audience, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm Chris Domas. I'm an offensive security researcher at Intel, kind of doing proactive security research against our products. So I try to look at forward-looking research to figure out what the future threats are, see where we can harden our platforms there.
And I'm Burzin Daruwala. I'm a director also at Intel in the IPAS organization, focused on offensive security research of client platforms and generally red teaming at Intel.
Well, it's great to have you both here. I was just mentioning before we started recording to Chris that our second episode of Chips and Salsa, we had Stephanie, his wife, on the show. So now we have both Domases here. So,
double threat.
Only the kids remain.
Yeah, we'll get them sooner or later when they write their first book. But Chris, just for some background, I think it was back in 2015, prior to you joining Intel, you found an issue called Sinkhole. And we're here today to talk a little bit about ChipSEC, a new issue that was found against AMD. Can the two of you spend a little time talking about the nature of these two issues, how they're similar or different, and why, vulnerabilities in, at this level, at the SMM level, are important?
Yeah. I'll try to start with the end first. I think SMM vulnerabilities are important, and people are really interested in them because SMM has sort of a unique position of privilege and power on the platform. It can execute mostly invisible to the operating system, and it can do a lot of things that the operating system can't always do, like modify the actual firmware sitting on flash or stuff like that. So it's definitely an appealing area for adversaries to look at. But then sort of working the way backwards through your questions as far as some of the different vulnerabilities over the years compared to the most recent thing people are talking about. So some time ago in I think 2015, I was looking at SMM and saw what I called the sinkhole vulnerability. So the sinkhole issue is sort of an interaction between two unrelated pieces of the architecture. So on the one side, you've got the APIC, which is the Advanced Programmable Interrupt Controller. It's sort of used to control interrupt events on the platform. And then on the other side, you've got system management mode, specifically SMRAM, which is where it's the VRAM that SMM executes from. So that'll come into play with this newest vulnerability as well. So normally you interact with the APIC through a small region of memory. If you want to modify the APIC registers, you access that region of memory. And in turn, that memory doesn't really go to memory. It goes to the APIC instead. But there's a legacy feature in the architecture where you can shift where that region of memory or that window is. And if an attacker shifts that window to overlap SMRAM, where SMM is executing, you can use that to corrupt the data accesses that SMM is getting. And from that, an attacker can essentially hijack SMM or start executing with SMM privileges. So that was the original sinkhole vulnerability from 2015. Now the new thing people are looking at is what they're calling ChipSEC. So ChipSEC has to do with a bit called TClose on the platform. So it's got kind of a lot of similarities with sinkhole, but then a lot of differences too. But what TClose lets you do is redirect that SMRAM to a different area as well, thereby corrupting SMM accesses. so an attacker can hijack SMM. So it sounds similar, and they are very similar. Both sort of leverage the CPU itself, as opposed to there's other SMM vulnerabilities that use firmware or software. Both are sort of these configuration changes that designers didn't anticipate that allowed this SMM privilege escalation. And both, and I think this is an important aspect, is both are sort of legacy features for compatibility reasons. They're both in there so that modern processors can work with older hardware. And then both are fixed with microcode, which is usually a difficult fix to do. But those are sort of the main the main similarities between the two. But then there's a lot of interesting differences too that at first seem kind of nuanced, but then I think tell us a lot about the different vulnerabilities. So the biggest one I see is that memory sinkhole, the older of the vulnerabilities, is sort of, like I said, an interaction between two very different features. I was trying to think about this more. It's sort of like if you had a safe and I told you I could open your safe with a leaf that I found, that would be very unexpected. Nobody expects a leaf to be used against a safe, but that's kind of what the memory sinkhole was all about, using something unexpected against something else. But TClose, the newer vulnerability, it's not an unexpected interaction. It's actually a documented feature. You can go into the specs and you can see that TClose redirects these SMM accesses to MMIO. So sort of back to the safe analogy, if SMM was the safe, then TClose is like a setting that lets you change the way the lock works. So the reason that matters is I think it makes the memory sinkhole vulnerability a lot harder to exploit. You have to use a feature in a very unexpected, unintended way. Whereas the ChipSEC vulnerability, the new vulnerability with TClose, is much more straightforward. It's toggle a bit and you change the way SMM executes, sort of at a fundamental level. So I think the new vulnerability is a lot easier to exploit. The other big difference I sort of saw when thinking about these was the older vulnerability, the sinkhole vulnerability. And I didn't know this when I was working on it, but it was actually discovered internally at Intel years before I looked at that externally. So I think I published that issue in 2015, but Intel had actually patched that back on Sandy Bridge after identifying it themselves, which came out in 2009, I think. And that sort of gave a much narrower window of impact for that older vulnerability compared to the new TClose issue, which looks like it's quite a bit broader. But I think that kind of sums up my interpretation of the kind of history behind these types of vulnerabilities, why people are looking here, why they're relevant, and the similarities and differences between this vulnerability and what it's kind of named after.
A quick correction there. Sandy Bridge came out for use in 2011, but it was available and first displayed at IDF in 2009. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Burzin.
And overall, the other thing to add, I don't know if the audience essentially is familiar with what the capabilities of SMM are. Some even call it the God mode, right? Once you are able to go ahead and go there, you can bypass multiple other protections that are there on your platform, including OS level protections. And so it's extremely important to keep it sanitized, to keep it protected.
So as you both know, customers have asked Intel why our products aren't affected by ChipSEC. So let's dig into some of the proactive security assurance and hardening efforts that you both have been involved in for years. So let's start with the security assurance side.
Yeah, let me just take a top-level view of what we at Intel have been doing for the past decade plus. And SMM and hardening SMM is just one portion of it. Overall, as far as our offensive security research approach goes, we have looked at all different types of firmware that Intel delivers, every other privileged software, whether it's microcode or anything internal that's running that could be used by an attacker to cause damage to a system, and that could cause any kind of privilege escalation or violation of the CIA principles has been looked at. Now, the way we do it, obviously, number one is going through systematically, thoroughly, and categorically into each and every feature that we provide, whether it's a generic feature like SMM or if it's a security feature. But beyond that, we also have programs established which run to go provide these kind of security assurance capabilities. One is, for example, the hackathon program. And each and every organization that develops a product which goes out at Intel is expected to go ahead and run security assurance steps and run hackathons where security experts, functional experts get together, hack the product for a given period and scope, and go ahead and disposition those findings. We also have tried to move away from the whack-a-mole approach, which is find a vulnerability, fix a vulnerability, find another one, fix another one. To give you a very good example of that and what we are calling as hardening, there is ACMs, as people know, the authenticated code module that Intel uses for TXT and other purposes. It's quite a privileged code, and what we have done is gone ahead and tried to go make it more hardened. Now, as experience shows, right, developing any bug-free code is hard. Obviously, that's the approach that each and every developer will go try do. However, if it's hard, there is eventually going to be some way or mechanism for an attacker to go ahead and find a route through that bug, whether it's through that given code itself that you have written or through other adjacencies. And so what we have done is we have tried to go ahead and deliver multiple incremental security improvements. And though hardening alone cannot guarantee the absence of bugs, it can serve to reduce the exploitability of bugs. So to name a few, we have looked at transparent enhancements, including lib-safe containment, also known as secure memory copy. We have looked at implementing shadow stack and shadow pointers for control flow integrity or redundancy on ACMs. We have even looked at post-quantum cryptography and data XOR code, isolation, right? All these enhancements address classes of vulnerabilities. In the case of shadow stack and shadow pointers, it's essentially trying to go prevent or at least make it harder to exploit classic buffer overflows. Yeah, and we have done all of this in a minimally intrusive manner to collectively reduce the Intel platform's attack surface and overall business risk. And so this has been going on for a period of time, and Chris can attest to the kind of work that he has gone through and the thoroughness for going through it on the SMM part with the hundreds of MSRs that have been reviewed to make sure none of them affect, right? So I'll jump it off to Chris.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. So sort of, building on what Burzin said and then looking specifically at some of the efforts we've had on SMM. So I think one of our biggest successes here is this platform configuration tooling that we call ChipSEC that covers SMM, but also sort of all of the platform firmware. So we released ChipSEC to customers. It's an open source tool. But basically what ChipSEC does is it helps OEMs configure the platform securely. Basically, it helps them correctly use the security features we're providing so that firmware doesn't forget to set lockpicks or doesn't disable security features or otherwise, leave the system in some sort of insecure default. So it's a really neat tool. You can run it on your own system. It isn't just for our customers. You can run it and see if your own system's configured securely or correctly or not. And I think that's done a lot to sort of raise the bar as far as these types of vulnerabilities, as far as SMM security, because it gives customers and developers a way to sort of tackle the complexity of platform security. So I think that's definitely one of the big things that we have as far as sort of improving the overall security of system management mode. Then another one that I think is really interesting that we have internally is a tool called Excite, and it's uses something called symbolic analysis. So one of the most common vulnerabilities that we have in SMM. We've talked about Sinkhole and Sinkclose, but the far more common issue that's out there is something called call-out vulnerabilities, which is when you've got this SMM code, which is supposed to be sitting in SMRAM, but it's lacking some sort of security checks on the input it receives. And from that, an attacker can trick it into executing the attacker's code. So what we developed to try to squash this whole class of vulnerabilities is this symbolic analysis tool for system management mode. So symbolic analysis, what it does is it helps computers sort of reason about all the possible different inputs that can come into a function and look for ways that those inputs can be used maliciously. You can kind of think of it as like a fuzzer on steroids. So we use that on our own SMM code, and as also the SMM code in EDK2 is sort of the open source piece of platform firmware. So we've used that extensively to sort of preemptively identify and mitigate these call out vulnerabilities in SMM. But we've kind of those are two things on the tooling side, but then sort of also on the proactive security research side, we've done a tremendous amount in SMM as well, sort of trying to look for and catch these types of vulnerabilities before they escape. So as an example, I mentioned earlier that both the memory sinkhole and the TClose vulnerabilities are legacy features. So we identified that pretty early on as a probable attack vector from external actors, that maybe legacy features can be used in unintended ways. So we did a lot of research trying to look for all the legacy features out there, look at how they could be used against SMM or against the rest of the platform in ways that weren't anticipated, and sort of try to lock down those things. It's really easy in security research to get fixated on looking at what's the latest change, what's the newest and greatest thing that I should be focused on, and forget that you're also inheriting all this old stuff that might also be used against you. So we've put a lot of effort into really locking that down and hardening those aspects of the platform to prevent any escapes here. And another really interesting one, I think, that Burzin mentioned as well is the MSRs, the model-specific registers. So both in the older case of the vulnerability, the memory sinkhole vulnerability, the APIC is configured through an MSR. And in this new TClose vulnerability, the TClose bit sits inside of an MSR, a model-specific register on the platform. So we also recognized that one a while back, that the MSRs were going to be a way that attackers are trying to break into SMM. So we've done a lot of work in reviewing hundreds to thousands of MSRs on the platform to very, very carefully, line by line, ensure that there's no obvious way to break into the system through these registers. And we've even developed tooling to help us do those reviews. So I think there's a lot that's gone on, and a whole slew of past and ongoing one-off efforts looking at different threats to SMM, or what people might be thinking about outside of the company that we need to anticipate beforehand. So I think we've had a lot of progress here and done a lot of great work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't think we delved into it too much, but you guys are both part of our offensive security research team in the Intel Platform Assurance and Security Group, right? And so how many of the folks in that team kind of look at this area on an ongoing basis?
So we kind of do a divide and conquer approach because the platform is vast and no single person on this planet actually knows how everything works, right? And so we have certain pockets of expertise where we go ahead and, of course, take advantage of the expertise that the expert brings. For example, for SMM, that would be Chris. But as Chris was also alluding to, we go ahead and go develop tools, whether it's specifically targeted fuzzers to go find vulnerabilities, or hardening efforts like we were talking about. But overall, our team is divided upon many different things that are important for us. Experts who are both wanting to work on it, are passionate about it, and are collaborating on it, go towards and gravitate towards that specific area, take ownership of it, and move it forward.
This is really interesting. If somebody was fascinated about these topics, what resources are available for people to learn more, to kind of look at some of the prior art you guys have helped contribute to?
Yeah, there are multiple publicly available white papers that have been published, which we can provide links to. Chris has talks at Black Hat and other conferences on it, which he can also go provide links to. Chris, anything else?
No, I think that kind of covers the resources available. Thanks, Burzin.
All right, that's great. Yeah, we'll get the links in the show notes underneath the video here and in the video. But we want to thank you guys for taking the time to come and help explain to customers who have been asking, so why isn't Intel affected by this? And I think you guys did a great job of talking through our product security assurance efforts and our security hardening efforts. And we appreciate your time doing all of that. So thank you again.
Yeah, one thing to add, this is not something that can be addressed overnight. It has been going on as far as our hardening and our security assurance efforts. The offensive security research has been going on for years. And so overall, I feel pretty comfortable with the amount of resources we have poured into making sure that Intel hardware is secure, and also the level of hardening that we are doing right now. So keep in mind, guys, an immediate fix is not easy to go achieve.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Wow, it is amazing to see the focus and dedication we've had in this critical area, Jerry.
Yeah, and I think as Burzin mentioned, all code is susceptible to vulnerabilities, but solid product security assurance practices can be a key differentiator both in product development and when issues are found in products already released.
Right. And customers should check the link below to read about the ABI research report, where Intel was named #1 in the silicon industry for product security assurance.
Yeah, also at that link, you'll find our 5th annual Intel Product Security Report, and these reports offer key insights into our security assurance.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everybody for watching.
Thank you.